What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Rad Pack Pod. This is Garrett at Born to Be Rad, aka Gassy Garrett.
And I'm Mel from My Killer Podcast, aka Smelly.
Bro,
And I am your
what are you
co-host,
doing?
Justin,
What am I
aka
doing?
Disgusting.
Listening to the Rad Pack and the podcast.
We
That's all
are
great and everything, but
Rad Pack.
they clicked the video. What do you mean they clicked the video? I ain't even released the video yet. Yeah, they clicked the video. Oh, so are you gonna get into it or what? Stop listening to the Rad Pack and talk about the Rad Pack. What's going on, y'all? I mean, I wasn't listening to the Rad Pack. Damn Rad Pack. Nah. You know why? Because I got the Rad Pack. That's right. Mel, Justin, and Garrett all swinging by to do a top 5 of the 90s movies we just can't live without, ride or die. And if you think what my top 5 are, I think you're wrong. But let's get into it, because right after this special intro, we are going to get into Garrett, Mel, Justin, and of course, myself. And this is the Rad Pack Takeover. I saw these 3 people.
In your dreams?
No.
While you're awake? How often do you see them?
On YouTube. They were walking around like regular people. But they weren't regular people. They were rad. I want to tell you my secret now. I see rad people.
What's up, everybody? Garrett back here, and I want to give a big thank you to Nick for asking me to participate in this top 5, this series that he's doing where he brings on other content creators, other YouTubers that give their top 5 for a certain category. Now, this month seems to be all about the 90s, which I'm very happy about, because the 90s was such a big time for me when it came to movies. I always talk about being an 80s guy, loving 80s horror, but the 90s were like that age where I just really experienced so many movies, because it was almost like my childhood into my teen years. So I really experienced kind of a little bit of everything. And I'm going to be doing some more 90s stuff on my page this month as well. So going through all these 90s movies, man, there's so many good ones. I forgot how good. You know, my favorite genre is horror, but honestly, I don't even think I have any horror in this top 5 that I'm going to do today, because the 90s for me were just so widespread. I mean, the action, the comedies, it was just so good. So as I went through all these 90s movies, I was like, what top 5 that I don't think I could live without? And that's what this is about today. It's which top 5 movies of the 90s you don't think you could live without. Now, live without versus favorites to me is different, right? Like, I'd give you my absolute favorites, my top 5 favorite 90s movies, or the best movies of 1990. But the way I try to do this, and I probably made this a lot harder on myself because I was really kind of going back and forth about what I wanted to pick here, is these movies to me are not only great movies, but they're movies that I feel like I could watch anytime at a drop of a dime. If I'm doing something, having it on in the background, if I'm just want to chill out, I'll throw it on and have a good laugh, or you know, something that's just truly entertaining to me. So here's my top 5 movies from the 90s that I think I could watch at any time and never get bored. Now, starting in at number 5, you'd actually probably find this to be, out of everything I'm going to talk about, the most out of left field. But man, this was such a big movie in the 90s. And I remember seeing it in the theater, and I was just kind of blown away. I was still very young at the time. I was a preteen when this came out. And even still, it was just something very different than anything I've ever seen before. And the thing about this movie is that I really appreciate, it's a long movie, so if I've got something going on and I want something playing in the background that I can kind of enjoy, I'll have this playing sometimes. And the story is just so intriguing. There's so many different layers to this story. And I feel at the end of the day, it's an emotional roller coaster, but at the end of the day, I do feel like it's a pretty feel-good story, and it is something that I don't think I'd ever get bored of. It's very rare that a movie like this would ever be replicated. And that is 1994's Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks. And like I said, it's just something very different than anything that we've gotten I think, ever. It was just such a unique story at the time, and it is one of those movies that I feel like I could always just kind of have on and never really get tired of it. It's a great story. There's so many different, like I said, layers to this story, and I just think this is a great one. I know most people have probably seen it already, but this is going to come in at my number 5, which again was such a hard decision, especially this 5th spot, because I had so many other movies that I feel like could have fit here, but this is the one I chose. Forrest Gump comes in at number 5. All right, so number 4, again, probably not my top 5 90s movies of all time, but it's another one that I just absolutely adore, one that I can watch anytime. If you follow the Rad Pack, you know we did an episode talking all about this movie because we all absolutely love it. And this is a comedy from 1992, and it is Encino Man. I don't know what else to say about this that we didn't already say in our review and in our retrospective, but man, this is such a fun movie. It really gives you the feel of that early 90s, kind of that transition. The 90s to me are in like 3 parts. You have the transition from 80s to 90s where it feels very 80s, but you start to see a little bit of change. This really does a good job with that when it comes to just like how people acted and the fashion, and really, really great movie. And it's something that I feel like needs to get a little more love. I don't know what's going on with this. I heard Disney owns this, so that's why we haven't got any upgrades. I heard Disney might be doing some more physical media, but this is definitely one that I think deserves a real nice upgrade, and I'm really hoping someday we get it. All right, so I'm on my number 3 right now. So this is a little bit of a change of genres right now. This thing came out in 1991. I was young when this came out, but it was one of the first kind of rated R movies I saw up until that point, and I absolutely love it, and it still just works today. When it comes to the 90s, this movie cannot be denied. I bet this is on everybody's top 90s list, and that is dun, 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 dun. Terminator 2 from 1991. Man, I don't know what else to say about this movie, but when I think of the 90s, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger was such a big thing for me in the 90s. So, of course, it had to be represented on here. Not only this is my top 5 movies I couldn't live without from the 90s, but this is one of my top 5 probably favorite movies of the 90s is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So now you can see I've been kind of all over the place with the genres. I had some drama, I had some action, I had some comedy. We're going to go back to the comedy right now for a movie that came out in 1992. This was a staple of my childhood. It's a movie I could watch anytime, anywhere. I could probably recite it front to back. I've seen this thing probably hundreds and hundreds of times, and it never gets old. And to me, this is the same like I said about Encino Man. It screams early 90s, and that is Wayne's World. Man, I don't know what to say about this. This is just, to me, a masterpiece to take these characters from Saturday Night Live and create a movie and have it done so well. I mean, again, it kind of broke that fourth wall. They knew exactly what they were doing. I think this kind of inspired other movies that came out later down the road, but man, Wayne's World is just such a great movie. It's definitely one of my favorites of the 90s for sure, and I could not live without this thing. All right, so last but not least, probably my favorite movie of the 1990s. It cannot be denied. I know this is not going to be on a lot of people's number 1 list, but I do think this is my favorite movie of the 90s, and it did hit number 1 on this list because I could not live without this thing. This was another movie like Wayne's World that came out at the right place at the right time that really just made me who I am today, just because, man, this was so big back then. I saw this in theaters. I remember getting the VHS tape, and my brother and I must have watched this over and over and over again. I wish kids nowadays had stuff like this that would just be embedded in their brain forever. And that was 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I cannot say enough about this. In my opinion, this is an absolute masterpiece, and I think it still holds the test of time. I can't tell you how much this movie meant to me back in the day. I can't tell you how much this movie means to me now. It's just so perfectly done, in my opinion. It's dark, but at the same time, it's heartwarming, it's fun. They absolutely killed it, and I don't care what anybody says. These Ninja Turtles, these live-action turtles that came out and that were made in the 90s from Jim Henson, these things still hold the test of time, and I would absolutely love to see them bring these guys back to the big screen. They've got to be able to replicate these suits. Man, there's been nothing like it. Nothing's ever been able to touch this. No CGI, no live action. This is where it's at. The 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is my #1 movie of 1990 and the #1 movie of the 90s that I could not live without. So again, thank you, Nick. I appreciate having me on there. Like I said, this was really, really hard for me. I was going back and forth for weeks trying to find the perfect top 5 that I couldn't live without from the 90s, and it was not easy. But I do appreciate having me on here. I'm curious to see what you say. I have a feeling maybe some of the ones I said may hit your top 5 list. And I think you may be able to guess a couple that were on mine. So I'm curious to see what you have to say. Thank you once again for having me. It's been a pleasure. This is Garrett from Born to Be Rad and 1/3 of the Rad Pack. And like always, stay rad.
Hey, what's up, killers? It is your final girl Mel coming at you from My Killer Podcast, and today we are talking 90s. Our buddy Nick over at Movie AV Impulse asked the Rad Pack what our top 5 90s ride or die movies are. So that's what we're going to talk about. Here you go, Nick. Coming in at number 5 is Pump Up the Volume. This is a 90s Christian Slater movie. It actually inspired me to start a podcast. I absolutely love this movie and I cannot live without it. Coming in at number 4 is Empire Records. I don't think I need to state exactly why this movie rocks, but the soundtrack does help. And Rexy, you're so sexy! Number 3 on the list is The Crow. This is such a moody and amazing film, and it can't rain all the time. Brandon Lee's amazing. Absolutely love The Crow. I would die without it. Number 2 on the list is Gleaming the Cube. That's right, you guys guessed it. I talk about this movie all the time. I need an upgrade. I need an upgrade. I can't live without it. Also another Christian Slater movie. And number 1 on my top 5 90s ride or die movies is Natural Born Killers. Yes, anybody who knows me knows I absolutely love this movie. I can't live without it. I ride or die for it. Woody Harrelson is my man jam, and I absolutely love Juliette Lewis. This is such a weird movie, and every actor in this movie plays a part they've never played before. It has Tommy Lee Jones in it. It has Robert Downey Jr. in it, all playing the weirdest roles of their careers. This is a jam. And that is my top 5 90s movies. Thank you so much, Nick, for allowing me and my pack to come on here and talk 90s movies with everyone. Thank you everyone for hanging out, and stay killer.
What is going on? Justin here from Movie Watch Daily and The Dead Couch, and of course the wonderful Rad Pack. Nick, you set me up for failure here. This challenge, this top 5, it's too difficult. You hear me? But we're gonna get through it. I got a few honorable mentions that we're gonna burn through, and then we're gonna get into my personal top 5 90s movies that I cannot live without. And we're gonna start off with my first honorable mention, and that is Serial Mom. Kathleen Turner, Matthew Lillard, Ricky Lake, written and directed by the great John Waters. If you have not seen this, it's an amazing comedy, horror, satire movie. It's fantastic. Check it out, Serial Mom. Next up, this probably could have made my top 5, but there's so many to choose from, I couldn't decide. So we're going with Return of the Living Dead 3 for my next honorable mention. I love this movie, a little bit of a departure from the other movies in the series. Let's not talk about 4 and 5, okay? Can we just forget about those? But of the original trilogy, Return of the Living Dead 3 is a 90s movie I cannot live without. Next up, I could not have a top 90s movies that I cannot live without having at least one Stanley Kubrick movie. So my pick for a 90s Stanley Kubrick movie that I can't live without, honorable mention, is Eyes Wide Shut. It's dreamlike, it's surreal. Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise at the top of their game, great performances. It's just such a weird and interesting movie. Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. For my next honorable mention, I had to have a Tarantino in there. Pulp Fiction, the one that started it all, the one that really put Tarantino on the map and sort of set his career on course for what it is today. All-star cast, everybody knows Pulp Fiction, but there's a reason for that. It's a classic. That's my next honorable mention. For my next honorable mention, I know I have a lot of honorable mentions, but Nick's a good guy. He doesn't mind, right? I gotta cheat somehow and talk about all these movies from the 90s. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, an all-star cast. It's an amazing movie. You can't talk about 90s movies without talking about Terminator 2. For the next one, Shawshank Redemption. I love this movie. Original script by Frank Darabont, based on a short story by Stephen King. And again, an all-star cast. It's just a simply a classic movie. It's a perfect film in my eyes. And next up, a deep cut to sort of lead into the more deep cut nature of my top 5, and that is Pump Up the Volume with Christian Mother Bleepin' Slater. I almost forgot his name when I did that stupid joke. But anyway, if you guys haven't heard of this, this is before the days of the internet and anybody be able to start a podcast in their living room. This goes back to the days of pirate radio. Christian Slater is a loner at school, but at night he's hard Harry. With his pirate radio station in his parents' basement, and he sort of influences the culture of his whole town and high school. It's an amazing movie. If you've not seen Pump Up the Volume, check it out. Thanks for bearing with me on all of my honorable mentions. Now we're going to get into the main top 5, the first of which is probably one you guys didn't expect, but Captain Ron. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. I've watched this movie dozens of times. I love it. Martin Short plays a guy who inherits an old boat, and he wants to take his kids out and show them a good time, but he needs a captain. And of course, Kurt Russell is up for the job, and he is the kooky Captain Ron who goes on all kinds of crazy adventures in their boat. It's fantastic. Check it out. Next up, Pet Sematary 2, my personal favorite Pet Sematary. Another Edward Furlong movie. I love this movie. What can you say? It's goofier, it's sillier, but it's also pretty clever, and it's just a lot of fun. It takes a departure from the tone of the original Pet Sematary, but takes it to another stratosphere with Clancy Brown and his crazy antics. And I'm a sucker for 90s Edward Furlong. What can I say? Next up, Interview with the Vampire. I love this movie. This is probably my all-time favorite vampire movie. In fact, it is my all-time favorite vampire movie. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Antonio Banderas. It's just an amazing film, directed by Neil Jordan. If you have not seen Interview with the Vampire, maybe you just don't think you'll buy Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt as vampires. I promise you, if you like gothic vampire tales, you will fucking love this movie. Check out Interview with the Vampire. Next up, the goriest film of all time, Braindead, aka Dead Alive, by the great Peter Jackson. This was his first big film. He had done a couple other movies before this, but this, in my opinion, is his masterpiece, is at least in his early career. I'm aware of the Lord of the Rings movies, but check out Braindead. It's gory as hell. It's fun. It's a black comedy as well as being a super gory horror movie. It's the goriest zombie flick ever made. Check it out, Dead Alive. And finally, my number one 90s movie that I cannot live without is another Christian Slater movie, True Romance, a Tarantino script directed by Tony Scott. This movie feels so energetic. Every single character, every moment of this movie is memorable. That is why it is my number one 90s movie that I cannot live without. Nick, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having my Rad Pack buddies on the channel as well. You can find me at The Dead Couch. That's my collecting physical media channel. You can find my main channel, Movie Watch Daily. And of course, you can find me, Mel, and Garrett on our own channel, The Rad Pack. Guys, stay weird. Remember to always be yourself. And I will see you guys in the next one.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Garrett, Mel, Justin, you guys are just awesome. Thanks for making the video, and I'm glad to see your ride or dies, that just 90s movies you can't live without, because we all got them. Don't forget, they have their own YouTube channel now, so I will link that down below. I'll throw a little card either here or there. I will leave links to all their channels down below, as well as Justin's Dead Couch, but all of them have great channels, and together they are AKA the Rad Pack. So let's get into my top 5 with 2 honorable mentions. Yeah, I know Justin had a lot of honorable mentions, but you can't help it. It's just, it's so hard to pick just 5 movies. So I'm gonna try to fly through these as quick as I can and tell you the reason why I love these movies in a quick, brief description. So, coming in at number 5 for me, that is going to be Pulp Fiction. I swear, I just can't get enough of this movie. I know when it comes to Quentin Tarantino, a lot of people are more about Reservoir Dogs, which is totally fine. I don't think he really has a bad movie in his whole entire category. I count Kill Bill 1 and 2 as one movie. It's just split in half, and I just can't get enough of Pulp Fiction. This movie will forever be my number 1. While 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 will always change, number 1 will always be Pulp Fiction. Hands down, I can't live without watching this movie. I watch this movie at least 7, 8 times a year. I pretty much know it word for word. Coming in at number 4. Now, this to me is the perfect movie, hands down. You take 1 minute out of this movie and it just doesn't feel the same. And it is the perfect Stephen King book adaptation film there is out there. And I know everybody has their disagreements or agree with me, but Shawshank Redemption, nothing better than this movie. Everything is just flat out perfect. And this, the second I seen this movie, when me and my dad sat down to watch this, he had it on VHS, I was just absolutely blown away. Even at a young age, I just absolutely love this movie. Can't do without it. Live with it. I think the only other movie that comes close to this, but is not a perfect movie to me, is The Green Mile. That's another great movie, but this one is definitely number 1 perfect movie. I can't live without this one. Now, number 3 for me is what made me fall in love with Michael Bay. I've loved Michael Bay. I love all his films, whether they're trash or not, and whether you agree or disagree, I just can't live with this. Plus, this has sentimental value to me, and that's going to be Bad Boys, the first one. Me and my cousin watched this thing on repeat like every day, and I'm not kidding. If we weren't watching MTV for the rap music videos, I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for my cousin Eddie, man, there would just be so many movies I wasn't introduced to because my father was so damn strict, and I got to give it to him. He really opened up my eyes to cinema, and I just absolutely love Bad Boys. This just hands down, this is my favorite Michael Bay movie. But it's just because it holds a lot of sentimental value too. Because I know if anything ever happened to me or my cousin, this movie would always bring back those good memories for the both of us. So just an awesome, awesome Michael Bay film. And Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, you can't go wrong. Coming in at number 2, which this one to me is the perfect gangster movie. So don't get that twisted. I always separate mafia movies and gangster movies. And that's because to me they're 2 totally separate genres, but those 2 are my number 1 genres. I am obsessed with mobster movies and gangster movies. So number 2 is going to be Carlito's Way. This to me has the perfect amount of everything. Romance, cinematography, Al Pacino, one of his best. I mean, just the opening lines to this movie are just fantastic. I can't say anything else, but I mean, just the whole, somebody's pulling me close to the ground. I ain't panicked. I've been here before. You can't match Al Pacino when it comes to gangster films. I mean, to me, everything that Al Pacino does is just absolutely amazing. But this will always be my number 1 gangster movie, not to be mistaken with mafia movie. Because like I say, everybody confuses the 2. And they're totally separate genres, to me, subgenres. My 2 honorable mentions before we get into my number 1, and I did a life lessons on this movie because to me, addiction is a very big thing. And, you know, it's just one of those great things. I will link that video in case you haven't seen it, but it was one of my most powerful, most difficult videos to put together. But I'm glad of the outcome. And that's going to be Basketball Diaries as an honorable mention. This to me is like one of Leonardo DiCaprio's best. I mean, just when he was in his younger years and teenage years, he was killing it in the movies, and he still is today. and I just can't get enough of Leonardo DiCaprio. And my other honorable mention is right behind this. Now, this one is my favorite mafia movie besides A Bronx Tale, which I think is a great movie, but it's going to be on Goodfellas. I love this one. I don't own the 4K because I didn't like the transfer, so I kept my Blu-ray copy, and that's the way I'm going to ride out. If I don't like something, I'm not going to keep it. But Goodfellas is just that opening line, like that opening scene of them just riding in the car, the way the music opens up, the one take shot when they're walking through the restaurant, and R.I.P. Ray Liotta. Just this is one of the greatest mafia movies ever made, and you might want to tune in on Sunday because I'm doing a special tribute to 5 of my favorite mafia movies, and you're gonna find out why I am so obsessed with the mafia and mafia movies. So tune in on Sunday. And my last but not least, number 1, if I had to pick just one movie to be stuck on a desert island and I couldn't watch anything else, and I mean like nothing else, it was just this movie all the time, back to back, my number 1 pick for the 90s movies is always going to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was the very first film I seen with my stepfather. He took me to the movie theaters, and like I said before, it's got a lot of sentimental value. He bought me the VHS when it first came on, and I remember getting the Part 2, Secret of the Ooze, which it had the green tape, and it had the clamshell, which I don't believe that this one had the clamshell when I got it, but I know Part 2 did. But this movie just means so much to me, and, you know, just looking back on, you know, having that whole father-son bond that we once had, and, you know, being able to share this same thing with my youngest son is just totally awesome because he loves this movie. And I got a special review also coming up for this one with a special little Blu-ray release from. That's going to be my number 1 pick. Thank you guys again for tuning in. If you haven't, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It helps me get into that algorithm, or so they say. Special appreciation and thank you to the Rad Pack. Remember, I will leave links down below to not only their podcast and their YouTube channel that they all have together, but also their individual channels. Believe me, if you don't know who they are, you just got a taste of them, and you're going to love all 3 of them. So again, shout out to Garrett, Justin, Mel. Thank you so much. And I will see you on Sunday.
But again, thank you guys all for watching the original YouTube faction, the Rad Pack. And this is Garrett at Born to be Rad. And like always, stay rad.
Stay weird.
Stay killer.
Thank you.